is important. I am, you are, we are together. Everyone is important. I am, you are, we are together. Everyone is important. I am, you are, we are together.
Hello. Greetings. How do we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person? 35 years ago, I wrote a song that said, "Everyone is important." It's a fine song. It carries the meaning of inherent worth and dignity of every person, but with a more singable lyric. Because it's very difficult to sing, "We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person." So it was everyone is important. But in today's context, that sounds suspiciously like all lives matter, which is true enough. But it is not specific enough. In this time when unarmed black people are 3 times more likely to be killed than unarmed whites, they are 37% of the victims but only 13% of the population. In this time of mass incarceration of black people, one can legitimately ask anyone who says all lives matter if they are including black people. Imagine if on the street there was a house on fire, and the fire people came to that house and started trying to put out the fire, and all the neighbors said, "Wait a minute, all houses matter. Please douse all the houses on this street with water and ignore that one that's actually on fire." It's important that we're able to say Black Lives Matter, because we cannot assume that it is meant by all people in this country. To affirm and promote the inherent dignity of all people is important. But how do we hold ourselves accountable while doing it? This question loomed large at this year's General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Each year, over 4,000 Unitarian Universalists gather for our annual conference, and we vote on our bylaws and business resolutions, and usually a couple statements about important issues of the day. In my 25 years of ministry, I've attended 12 of these, and they've been held in various places like Arizona, Indiana, Boston, Florida. It's fun to attend these meetings. It reduces the isolation of being a religious minority. Most UU congregations are the only UU congregation within 50 miles. And so we get the sense that we're just a small group of people that don't matter. But when you're in a convention hall, you realize there is a lot of people that have your back. And one's not alone in one's quest for religious freedom and the pursuit of justice. This year, It was scheduled for Providence, Rhode Island. And I made my usual calculation. The Northeast is very expensive. And I tend not to go to General Assemblies that are in very expensive cities. So I was planning to attend online, which has been an option for the last few years, and maybe even show off and invite people to our new sanctuary and new screens, and we could watch it together as a group. But we know that that was not possible. With the COVID-19, the entire General Assembly was virtual. The past 3 years have been rough for our tradition. In 2017, our president resigned over a controversial hiring practice that were deemed racist. And last year at General Assembly, a disgruntled white male minister distributed a report saying that his kind were being marginalized in the UUA. And that was perceived as hurtful to most people in attendance, including most of the white males, as well as women and people of color. Yes, white males are no longer the center of attention and power. But we need to recognize that they never should have been. The Commission on Institutional Change was convened 3 years ago to study these issues. And they gave a thorough report, which you can order online. And the report and its recommendations were accepted with a 97% majority of delegates in attendance from around the country. This will be hard work. The tone of this General Assembly was very earnest and very ominous. When you're in a convention center, there's all the hugs and the smiles and the old friends gathering at the finer restaurants of the city, and people mill around the convention center and they learn about all the activities that various people in their congregations are doing. But this year there were no hugs, and they were needed. We tried to heal each other while separated by long distances. A lot of pain with the COVID-19 resurgence in this country and all the inequities in healthcare, people of color being disproportionately affected, and the racial bias in our justice system has become so apparent and so egregious. And within our congregations, despite our denomination's history of abolition and civil rights work, we have had a hard time recruiting and retaining people of color. The report by the Commission for Structural Change was called Widening Our Circle of Concern. Here are a few of the recommendations from the report. Acknowledgement of anti-oppression work as a theological mandate is essential. We need to resurrect, research, document, and teach the words of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, LGBTQ individuals, women, and others who have been largely lost through their presence has been with us throughout history. These constitute a valuable tool for our time. And I thank Anthony for bringing up some of those words. The words that King spoke to UUA, asking us if we were going to sleep through the revolution. Sadly, those words are very important today. And we also listened to the words of Maya Angelou, who said, "I know why the caged bird sings." And this is a reminder of some of the pain and struggle and hope that has lasted through all of this. And so we need to further incorporate and reclaim the accounts of Unitarian and Universalist leaders of color, indigenous descent, in our tapestry of faith resources that we teach our kids, and in our worship. Back in March for Women's Month, you may have remembered that I lifted up Fannie Barrier Williams, a black woman who was very influential at the turn of the 20th century in our faith. What I hear in this recommendation is the call to be an anti-oppression activist. Part of this learning from women and non-white people, we need to hear their experience, listen to their voices. They know better than the white male dominant culture what they've been going through. To be inclusive in this world, we need to be inclusive in the stories we tell. One of the recommended actions was complete the Article 2 mandate as review as mandated by the UUA bylaws, with a call for diversity, equity, and inclusion as a lens used. This goes to the heart of our faith. Article 2 of our bylaws contains the 7 principles of our faith and the 6 sources. And we as a denomination are to review these every 15 years. They were first adopted, the 7 principles, in 1987. I joined my first UU church in 1988, and I thought they were long settled doctrines of this church. But our bylaws require us that we periodically review our values so that our congregations continue to grow and learn rather than simply recite creeds of old. As someone who has written and recorded songs for the 7 principles, this is kind of nerve-wracking for me because I might have to write all new songs. But it'll be worth the struggle as we create and recreate this covenant with each other. Co-moderator Alandria Williams made this statement, which got my attention. About the review, she said, "It should ask us to see love and inaction as a path forward. Our commitment to anti-racism, anti-fascism, the white supremacism, and multiculturalism is love in action, and should be the center of any revision of Article 2. Finally, the principles and purposes should lead us into the second quarter of the 21st century while honoring the historic roots of our liberal progressive faith. We therefore charge this commission to root its work in love as a principle guiding its work, attending particularly to the ways that we and our root traditions have understood and articulated love, and how we have acted out of love. To me, this statement highlighted a major flaw in our 7 principles, which I love. But nowhere in our 7 principles is the word love mentioned. When I think of the guiding principles in my life, it's trying to make words of love real. I grew up learning that God is love and an object of worship. As I studied about God, I reversed the equation. Love is God, an action in which we participate. An old UU phrase is that we are a religion of deeds and not creeds. While we may be inspired by different sources, we are united in love to work for a better world. The Article 2 Commission over the next few years will be surveying the congregations, holding webinars and educational events, getting UUs to create a single document of who we are and who we want to be is a tall order. At GA, they began by asking 3 questions. The first question is, what do you think are the most important values and principles for us as a faith? Or in theological terms, what is our theological grounding? This asks us to really look at what are the things that we find ultimate and most important. We have to know what we're striving for. The second question is, what principle sources or language most reflect our living our principles out loud and are embodying justice? That's the actual looking at those words, looking at the 7 principles and say, what do they say and what do they not say? Should they be 7? Should there be 5? Should there be 8? There's no magic formula. But we have to look at what are the ideas that we were striving for in 1987 and what should we keep and what should we enhance and what should we discard as we move forward. And third question is, what does it mean to be an anti-racist, multicultural, and liberating faith? Some of these terms are unfamiliar to those who haven't been attending General Assembly since 1987. We've gone through tons of debates, tons of false starts, tons of things that had some success and some things that failed miserably. These questions are hard to answer. And it'll be harder to compile the answers and edit them into a cohesive document that has a consensus of acceptance among UUs. We are a hard faith. We do not rely on easy answers from a book written long ago. We are asked to create living scriptures from our deepest thoughts and feelings right now. That is why the next recommendation from the Commission about widening our circle of concern is so important. That we should have the covenant and commitment and not comfort should be the binding fabrics of UU congregations and communities. Covenant and commitment, not comfort, should be the binding fabrics of UU congregations and other communities. It is good that the members of the UU Fellowship genuinely like each other. I see this camaraderie, this general good feeling of having a community of people where it's safe to be yourself and to have more comfort than we do in the wider community, which is much more conservative than we are religiously. But it's more important that we care enough about each other to do this difficult work. That we don't write off people who disagree with us. That we don't write off people whose ideas are too radical or too conservative. We're not in this debate to win, but we're in this debate to transform each other. We debate to create a wider understanding and empathy for different points of view, and the courage to make decisions to move forward. Another recommendation is a liberatory faith. Liberatory is a new word to me that I only learned 2 weeks ago. A liberatory faith will remember the mandate from our theological legacy and to privilege those most affected in our justice work, which should follow the voices of those most at risk. That is the sense of keeping us out of our historical pattern, of being a congregation of liberal, mostly liberal white folks, mostly well-educated, who have good ideas about what should be done. And our outreach to minorities is come check us out, see if you're one of us, and then you'll be welcome. We need to transform the way we welcome people. We must risk willing to be transformed by the people we invite in. And we have done this before. Our denomination and congregation has been changed by the welcoming of women and gay and lesbian people. In some ways, it's changed our way that we think about equality, but it's also changed us theologically. Because many of the gay and lesbian people and women that came into our denomination in the 70s and 80s were refugees from the Christian tradition. They held their Christian faith and shared it with us because the Christian communities of the time would not allow them to share it in Christian communities. So that opened us up to a wider understanding of the possibilities of theology, and that different theologies can rest in the same room if people are committed to caring about each other. And I'm happy to say that UUFMB has been doing some of the work already about listening to the voices of the people most at risk. When we attained a grant for Hurricane Florence relief, we made sure we partnered with Duffyfield Rising and others to help make sure that that money got to the neighborhoods that were most in need. And we work with Democracy North Carolina, and we participate in marches led by African Americans, and we participate in the Badge Faith program to foster better relationships between the community and the police department, so that if in any tragic situation occurs here, that we are working from a standpoint of knowing each other rather than the polarized difficulties that are in most of the nation. The relationship building resulted in the chief of police speaking at a Black Lives Matter rally. We've made a good start, and we can look for more opportunities to engage. This is only a few of the recommendations in the Commission on Structural Changes report. We've had such initiatives before as a denomination, but it's hard to keep them going. It's hard to keep it centered. That's the hard work that I learned at General Assembly this year. But there was also inspiration. And one of the most inspiring things are the speeches. The speeches by featured speakers. And there's two that I want to lift up to you. One was by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, the author of The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. And she talked about the phrase that we are a nation of immigrants. And I grew up in the 60s saying that's such a wonderful phrase, and it still has a good feeling to me. But she noted that it was coined by John F. Kennedy, who had written a book in 1958, which wasn't published until after he died, but he used this in his campaign, this idea of a nation of immigrants. And it was a very powerful phrase that allowed people to vote for the first and so far only Catholic to be President of the United States. It was an effective tool to break down the divide between older immigrants, who were mostly Protestant, and the newer immigrants, the Poles, the Italians, and the Irish, which Kennedy was, who were mostly Catholic. This was a groundbreaking strategy for the time. But now, in recent years, when I've heard people say that, immediately on Facebook or any social media, they get called out. Because that statement, as groundbreaking and positive as it was, contained a distortion. It ignored the people who were already living here, the indigenous people, and it distorts the history of African Americans, suggesting that they were merely another class of immigrants rather than people who were kidnapped. And so it gave me this idea that we are always reinterpreting, we are always trying to do better. And what were breakthroughs in the past are merely places that we jump off of into the future. And the Ware lecture this year was also very powerful. It's usually the highlight of every General Assembly. And in past, we've had such stellar speakers as Cornel West, Karen Armstrong, Maria Hinojosa, Kirk Vonnegut, Shirley Chisholm, and of course these words from Martin Luther King Jr. that Anthony read earlier in today's service. But this year's speaker was unfamiliar to me. Naomi Klein is the inaugural Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair in Media, Culture and Feminist Studies at Rutgers University. And throughout her speech, she made the connections between global warming, COVID-19, racism, and corporate capitalism. And she acknowledged the chaos that we are currently in, but lifted this chaos as an opportunity for change. She concluded by saying, "A Green New Deal will create tens of millions desperately needed jobs and revitalize some of the most neglected parts of our nation. I'm not here to offer easy reassurances or slogans. This moment in history deserves much more." But I do want to end with what I think is what is most important for us to understand. The ground is still shifting beneath our feet. Old truths are falling away. Old stories are collapsing along with the monuments that stood in for dangerous lies and omissions. The future is up for grabs. She quotes Kim Stanley Robinson, who in an essay observed that we are all now stuck in a science fiction novel that we haven't written yet, so no one knows how it ends. Naomi Klein said, "Writing it together, that is the key point." And she quotes Arundhati Roy, who compared the pandemic to a portal. She wrote, "We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudices and hatred or avarice or databanks or dead ideas, or we can walk through it lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it." That, my friend, is precisely what's happening on the streets. A movement led by black people and young people, but welcoming all races, gender identities, religions, and generations, has done the work of imagining another radically different world, and more beautiful world. And they are already fighting for it. Let us walk through the portal and join them. If you want to learn more about General Assembly, you can go to the UUA website, and there are some videos of some of the worship, which was also very inspiring. And we got a taste of that last week when we played the song "We Are" by Issei Barnwell, and a technologically marvelous choir singing from all over this nation, but in unison. I think that this has been one of the most important General Assemblies that I have ever attended. If we do what we hope to do, we will build a more thoughtful, inclusive, just, and loving Unitarian Universalism that will carry us to a brighter future. May we bless and be blessed.